Today on the Videomaker podcast, Chris and I talk all about tripods, and it's astonishing, actually, to believe that it's been, however many years we've been doing this podcast, and we haven't talked about tripods before. So today we're talking about basically all the different features that are in tripods, and whether or not you need to think about these things if you're a beginner versus an enthusiast versus a professional. So we go through all that stuff and talk about what we like, what we don't like, and what they all do, essentially, so you can make a decision for yourself. As always, if you've been listening to the podcast and you enjoy it, we would love it if you went to iTunes or Spotify and hit the follow button or the subscribe button, whatever they happen to call it in your app of choice, so that it delivers the podcast straight to your mobile device whenever we release one. So let's see, do I have anything else? Oh yes, the newsletter. If you want to subscribe to the newsletter or just support the podcast in general, you can go to videomaker.com/newsletter, and you will, basically that's the best way you can support this show, and it's free. So check that out. Okay, all that out of the way, let's get on with it. Welcome to the Videomaker podcast. I'm Mike Wilhelm, and with me, as always, is Chris Monlux.
Hello.
Chris, we're talking today about tripods, but actually before we get to that, we have to get to the important news, which is the new audio setup.
Yeah, again, I decided to go with aesthetics and have us use the same microphone, so it looks better. But we have that. We both have an inline mic preamp, so it's about as consistent as it could get, other than us being in different parts of the room and having, I think, different voices. But so hopefully we'll sound a little more uniform. And I'm thinking I might stick with this because I've tried all of our mics now in every different order. I think this is, I after all of the things of which one sounds better, I end up going with the one that looks best.
How lucky are we that for every episode of the podcast, we can open up the closet and go, what kind of microphone would we use this time?
Or what camera or any of that kind of stuff. I stay up late at night trying to figure these things out.
Okay, tripods. We are on episode, what episode is this? This has got to be 87 or 88,
I think it might be.
We're in the 80s, the late 80s.
Yeah.
And we're just now getting to tripods. I did a search through our list of old episodes. No mention of the word tripod in any of the titles or the descriptions. Incredible. I don't know how we went this long without talking about it.
We just like to handhold cameras, I guess, or put them on other things. Well, I mean, really, it's a tripod. If you're on a set, it's not the thing getting attention, right? There's a room full of stuff. You might even go to a place that's showing off tripods, and you might be more excited about the cameras that are on top of them just to display, just the plastic fake ones that are on there. They're just to show you how they look with the camera on there. You're like, oh, this is a cool plastic camera.
You proposed this topic, which is a good one, and just so happens to coincide with something that happened this weekend. My wife and I were out and about, and we just happened to come across one of the local news reporters who was interviewing someone. I don't want to give away the details in case that person happens to hear this episode. But I'm sure it was no fault of this person, probably the scenario that put this person in. But, they were out there interviewing whoever, hand holding a camcorder, and holding a microphone out in front of it, asking questions and holding it out. And my wife is watching this interview happen, and she goes, that person looks like they're having a hard time, doing all that work themselves. I'm surprised they don't have another person out here to, run the camera. And I just said, or a tripod, right? You could put the camera on a tripod and you can stand in front of it. And so it's just this is an absolutely essential tool that maybe, I don't know if this is common or not, but seems like if you're going to do any kind of video, there's camera and tripod. Those are the two absolute basics, right? For any kit.
Totally. Well, and the interesting part in this case is that, news reporters, at least working at a TV station in my past, go through cameras and tripods like they're candy, and they break them a lot. So it might have been just all the tripods got broken, and they're waiting for them to get fixed or for new ones to come in the mail. So they had to handhold them or what have you. But I've seen that happen. I've seen the expensive camera just barely clipped into the end of a tripod that's completely extended and over their shoulder. like just going for it. And I'm just like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
There's a lot of tripod etiquette that, if someone saw you doing that and knew what you're doing would be like, what the heck are you doing?
Yep.
I've seen that at NAB. So
Yeah.
I can't, it's not like it's super faux pas. If you know your stuff's locked down and you trust it, cool. But I've had mishaps with tripods and I thought I was locked in and I wasn't. And, when cameras fall, it's no good.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, that whole thing, like the camera being locked into the tripod, if you've ever taken like a gun safety course,
Yeah.
one of the first things they teach you, if not the first thing, is assume it's always loaded.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it doesn't matter if you've checked it 100 times, you always have to assume every gun is always loaded. Right? So the same thing I would say is true with tripods and their security to the camera's security to the tripod. One of the first things I learned when I got a job in video was when you're moving the tripod with the camera on top of it, keep one hand on the camera.
Yep.
And it was a lot easier when all cameras had handles on them, which is not much of a thing anymore. But
and the cameras were much bigger. I mean, let's face it,
right.
They're heavier, and so that's a real big issue. But a lot of people don't know how to pick the right tripod, and I think that's an issue. Really, when it comes down to matching the camera you're using to the tripod you need, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, we're talking video cameras here, right? So we're talking about fluid tripod heads versus ball tripod heads, right?
I would say that's the case for anyone who is seriously doing video. Like that's really the defining feature of, what makes something a video tripod versus a photo tripod is the fluidity of the head, because you can adjust it, you can pan it, you can tilt it while you're recording, and it looks nice.
And by fluid, we mean it's really just like a liquid that is being compressed to help you slow down the movement of your pan or your tilt, and it's just to give resistance against that. But it also allows it for smooth motion versus a ball head, which is usually about locking down. Great for time lapse, great for lockdown shot, but going to be terribly frustrating to use if you're trying to do any camera movement whatsoever.
Yeah. So I would make the argument, and this maybe a point counterpoint, like our last episode was full of these, that for a beginner, you just need something to hold the camera that can hold the camera without you being involved in holding it.
Yeah.
3 legs, put the camera on top, and you can step away, and that's it. It's working.
And it'll keep its framing. You don't want it to sag,
Yes.
no tilting while it's going, no slow tilt or anything like that. You want to lock it down. And you can get something that'll work for this at your big box store for $30 in a pinch. I've bought one needing a tripod for a wedding for an extra camera before. Just it's well worth having it just to be able to lock the camera down. Now, this is something that, the next time you collapse it, it might break in your hands, but it'll do the thing once. It's like a Harbor Freight tool, You depend on it once and it's good.
So, there's 2 main factors I would look at if I was an absolute beginner or making a recommendation for a beginner. One is get the height right. And that's because, if you're doing any kind of stand-up, you don't want to be like significantly taller than your tripod, And the second is, if you can, get a ball head. And the reason for that is it's really difficult to level a tripod without a ball head.
A ball,
yes.
You mean the socket?
So there's actually two types of things here. I'm trying to get my terminology right.
Yeah.
So there is there's the type of tripod actually that we have here. You can't see them, but they're like half ball. It's like bowl. That's the bowl.
That's the bowl. So you want to get a bowl head.
Well, I was saying a ball head.
Oh, okay.
Different thing. A ball head has a literal ball that it tightens down on. So you see these more in photo tripods.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in either case, in both cases, it allows you to adjust how level the camera is without tweaking the legs.
Yep. Yeah, I have a good anecdote about that. Very first day being a professional videographer. Very first day. I get sent out to go do an external shot of a business that we were making a commercial for. It's for the end page to go, here's the address and phone number. And I probably took an hour to get the shot, which is crazy. And then I go back to the station with the camera and everything. And the shot is totally not level. I'd never used a head that I could actually change the level of the head. I just assume we're going to zoom in and square it up in post. And my boss went, no, here, you do it this way. Go back out and shoot that again. I come back in half hour this time because I got it, and I got it good that time. But it's it can be an easy thing. And I remember one of the first weddings I ever did. The photographer said, "Hey man, you should spend the money you make on this on another tripod." And I remember being like, what are you talking about, man? This is for partying money, or whatever I wanted it for when I was 19. But, it's real important because it is that coverage, that ability to do that kind of movement from a tripod in general is going to be the difference between that just dude going crazy with the camera, doing a thing we call fire hosing, which is just not knowing what you're going to shoot because you're limitless when you're handheld, right? Oh, I can shoot it from the sky. I can shoot it from the ground. I can shoot it all around. And then all of a sudden everybody's dizzy and sick while watching your video.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things that a tripod really does is it forces you to be deliberate about what you're shooting. Yeah. The framing, the setup, the angle, all that stuff.
Yeah, so ball head, starting out, just really a tripod that you can change the shot up in any way. I mean, there's definitely like tripods that you just screw a camera on and you get what you get. That's, I guess, the cheapest, right? Or I guess it's just a tripod without a head on it. But I've used that like military tripods and stuff like that, just I need something to put it on.
Yeah.
Man, I've seen someone doing that and using duct tape over the top of it just to keep it stacked. Or I've forgot the plate to my tripod head, so I'm gaffing it together, and it works because you don't see that in the final product unless it comes off. But
yeah, I mean, for a beginner, that's the main thing is just get it to the point where the camera is standing on its own. You could do this with some monopods, but if a strong breeze comes along, it's going down.
I still have a hard time. Even the supposedly self-standing tripods, which will do it, but they're not like straight upright, and they kind of tip in a little bit, and it's like. I don't feel good about that.
The best of those, I think, are the ones that will stay up, and maybe they'll tilt a little bit, but if they can stay upright and you can take your hands off for just a second while you stretch your shoulders or something and then put your hands back on.
Yeah, and the nice thing about a monopod is that you can get those more active shots that you would more like handheld, but you can have that stability that you would get otherwise through having something touching the ground, one leg at least, if not more.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're moving on from beginners. So now I want to shoot something, and it's more than just for posterity or to remember something. I want to maybe show what I'm going to make to somebody else, right? At this point, what are we doing now? So what are the guaranteed things we need?
I think fluid head comes in as now it's a guarantee. You have to have this.
And if you plan on doing something like, say you have nothing and you plan on getting to this level, maybe just start with the fluid head. But if you're like, I'm not really sure yet, ball head's going to be cheap. Cool. Get into it, see what you like doing about shooting video and whatnot, and then move on. But fluid head is a must because as much as it might seem really boring to tilt or pan or combination of the two a shot compared to all of the just absolutely amazing types of camera movement you can get, they are more likely to be used because they are not terribly dynamic and not hard to intercut with other types of camera movement. Yep. So, you're going back to the tripod for either a static shot or a slight pan or a slight tilt or some small camera movement, which is really going to go a long way versus that just like completely static shot. This is when I first started making commercials. I remember talking about the end pages again. Okay, you could do an end page on a commercial that's the business, and I can just let it sit there. But it could be a little bit more interesting if I could do a really slow pan, and then all of a sudden it has a little more energy, and it's not just dull sitting there, just like lifeless. And so you can have a little bit of energy in what it's doing, and it might add to the feeling of your ad or whatever you're making. But those small movements, it's not the really big ones. You're not doing crazy whip pans all the time, and you're not like following race cars with tripods. I mean, sometimes you are, depends on what you're making, but those types of quick pans are actually not typical. And the more typical is the very, very held back slow pan. I use that still more. Sometimes I'll use that over a slider move because I can get it in 5 seconds versus having to set up the slider And even on a manual slider versus like, even if I had to program the slider, I would have already gotten like 3 different shots. And just that small little movement gives enough to the shot to be interesting, but you don't need a crazy parallax or some other kind of crazy movement from other kind of complicated sport.
Exactly. There's a number of situations where, even if you don't like the look of a classic pan or a tilt, where a regular pan is superior. So, you said obviously the speed of getting the shot is one thing, but in some cases you're doing something where there is no possible parallax, and you still need the camera movement. So, do you want to set up a slider to get this? Right. So, an example is if you're shooting a documentary or something, and you need to take a shot of a painting in a frame, and you need to pan from one part of the painting to another. No point in doing that with a slider, especially since you might need to do a little bit of a tilt in there somewhere also.
Yeah. And it's more efficient. I mean, that's what it comes down to, is like, you have the two next to each other. Which one is going to be worth spending more time on? And the answer is, well, it's not worth spending any more time on. Just get the easy shot versus the setting up the complicated shot. And I think that, those small pans can reveal like a dolly move or a slider can, but it's simple. It's just done with a pan. It's so easy to execute. Following someone out of a doorway, following someone into a building or a car moving. There sometimes there are movements that are following that you're not even thinking about the camera movement. You're thinking about the subject matter. And that's where that stuff really, really plays in. And it'll help you be efficient and not spend so much time shooting if you're like, oh, I can just do this really simply and gently. And it'll actually be far more watchable than just the static lockdown shot. But I would say lock down and do one shot with it locked down, because you just never know.
Yeah, and obviously there's other scenarios, outside the ones that you and I might be imagining, where it's like live video, and you're shooting sports, for example,
Totally.
and you just need to pan back and forth. That handheld is not going to work when you're making a production that's an hour long, or a continuous shot that lasts for 3 minutes. And likewise, a slider isn't going to cut it when the subject matter is, 100 feet away.
Yeah, it's so large that the movement of your slider is not going to make any kind of difference to the view of the final view from the viewer.
Right.
The really smooth pans are really to be applauded. I don't know the last time you watched baseball, or golf is a good example of this, but these just or I guess football does this too, following the ball. And golf and baseball is a white ball, usually on a really light background. But it's like they can just follow that thing right from the bat at the crazy velocity. Now you get used to how things come off of things, but man, these guys, those are the unsung heroes of sports broadcasting, are those cameramen that can just follow the action and just have acted like they had told the guy to steal the base instead of anticipating it, capturing it perfectly.
Next generation, by the way, a little bit of tangent here, for sports videography, I believe, will be autonomous drone shots for those ball shots, where the drone locks on and follows the ball through the air.
So the MLB owns the company that makes the baseballs.
Really?
So all they got to do is put a little chip in there, and then every camera can follow it with ease, right? And now it's just all autonomous everything. And I mean, they already have those drone type shots in football,
they have the cable
but they're
cams.
doing it with the cables, which is honestly probably for the situation far easier to deal with, because you just don't have to deal with any up and down. You can just always have that plane. And of course, flying a drone a bunch of people, that's about as nerve-wracking as you could get. I don't know if I'd be all that interested.
Well, no, it would be great for golf, right? Where you got to fly across 400 yards.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool, like a straight drone tracking shot of the ball flying 200 yards.
Yeah.
I mean, could we even handle that? That's the question.
I can imagine the drone coming in hot from behind, catching the ball, following it, and then sort of widening out as it lands, doing an orbit shot of it.
I was watching, I don't know if it was Smarter Every Day or it was a guy he was building with, but they were making a baseball bat that could hit a ball as far as he could go by engineering and stuff. And they did a shot where they were pitching the ball to the bat. Oh, it was a bat that had a bullet, or not a bullet, but it was a shell with gunpowder in it. So that's what gave the power to shoot the ball out. But so they were flying a drone right past the guy as he's swinging the bat, and it goes and follows it, and it's just so cool. Like, I mean, they're willing to put their drone in like harm's way, but it was a cool shot for sure.
Yeah. Okay, tangent over.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, fluid head, I think at the intermediate or enthusiast level is a must. And frankly, we're talking about sliders and all that as maybe an alternative someone might go to. I would say if you have a slider but you don't have a fluid head tripod, you got to get your priorities in straight with your gear.
I would point at you and laugh.
Yeah.
In the Nelson laugh. You should have gotten a tripod first. But we get excited about those shots because that's the thing. Is like you can be like, oh, excited about getting a camera or getting a drone because those are exciting things to buy. They're dynamic. They have a lot of learning curve. They have a huge amount of output you could do. Tripod's just not exciting to get. But man, when you are under the gun, needing to get a shot and knowing that your tripod can feel the way you want it to feel to just be able to get it on your first attempt, man, that's so valuable. I've just been so stressful having a producer over my shoulder watching my shot, and it's like I hope I can depend on this tripod so I can get this shot, because if I do it a couple times, I'm not going to be here for very long. So the next thing we have on here is tripod plates, right? So there's the Arc Swiss ones, which is more in the side of like photography. There's definitely a very small little cleat. You'll find them on like the Joby Gorilla Pods. It's a smaller little plate. And then there's the bigger kind of universal plates. But the idea here is that you can quickly take your camera off and on the tripod without having to lock it down and screw it to the tripod. And this is helpful for packing it from one place to another. But this is also where, I thought it was locked in, and then I moved the tripod and then it fell on the ground. Yeah. So there's, I would say, two things to look for here. One is, you just use the phrase, the universal plate. It is practically universal. If you go into B&H and just type in tripod plate, you'll get this. I've always thought it was a Manfrotto standard. Maybe it's just, I think of it as Manfrotto, but you'll see a bestseller, and that's the format, and it fits most intermediate tripods. Yeah. So we have a bin in the closet here with tripod plates. And the only ones that are in there now are ones that don't fit on any of our tripods. Yeah. And these are just the ones you'll find most typical on a quick plate. And it's not as universal as, like I said, the Arc Swiss or other types of plates, but they are like what gets shipped with a lot of things. And like I end up using them around here because it means I can use the same camera on multiple support and that kind of thing. But really the biggest thing is so you can take your camera off and put it away when you're done. Yeah, I wish there was a name for this standard. I just can't find the name for it. That's why I call it the universal. Yeah. So, and the funny thing is the biggest difference between them a lot of times is not the plate, but the depth of the screw. So how far the screw goes in. And if your camera actually has a stop on the inside, some cameras won't, you put it on there and the whole plate will just keep on spinning because you bottomed out. So usually I find actually if I switch out the actual screw, the 1/4-20, that almost any of them will work unless they came from like there's like proprietary ones for cheap tripods. I don't really get this, but it's like we told you you have a removable plate, and then they design it like nothing, and it's like a piece of plastic that screws on or whatever. But lame. Yeah. The main thing though is when you're looking for a tripod, look to find one that uses this universal type plate. Yeah, and you'll find it in most places. Yeah, but the other factor outside of that type is like the length of it. So they make longer plates that are designed for longer cameras, like you would put it on a camcorder, for example. Yep. So it prevents it from like swiveling around, for example. There's like a little pin that goes in there so that it won't spin on the top as you screwed it down, but also it provides extra balance. But the downside is to that longer plate, if you don't have a camera that fits that longer size, sometimes what happens, and this really depends on your camera, the plate itself will rub against the lens. Yep. And in some cases make the lens like unusable. Yeah, and I've even had that with the short ones too. You just can't back it up far enough. Yeah. Big flange, like cinema lenses have usually pretty bulbous where they attach to the camera, and that ends up getting in the way. Or ones with a cleat, tripod cleat on themselves, like a longer lens. But those little pens that usually, it's funny is you don't find too many cameras that actually have that detent to use other than camcorders, which is kind of strange. But I end up using a lot of times because most video cameras will have 2 holes. They might be both quarter 20, might be 1 quarter 20 and 1 3/8. But the nice thing there, that's when you get you can actually get them to stay locked on. Otherwise they eventually just, kind of get off from being used. And the way you attach the quick plate, that's super proprietary.
Yeah.
So, some come in from the side, some slide from the back, some come in and click. It really depends on what you're buying and where you're getting it from, what brand is how that does. And then not even that, but every brand has a few variations of that as well.
Yeah.
And I can't say that any of them, other than a camera that has a proprietary plate. So we have a Sackler that has their proprietary Sackler tripod plate on it, and it clicks in so positively because it locks in. The camera's plugged in. Everything I've ever used other than that, even real nice ones that are, meant real high end tripod, they don't have that such positive experience that you're still going, oh man, am I going to break this camera? If you've ever, if you're handling an expensive rig, the last thing you want to do is not have it lock in when you're mounted onto the tripod.
Some of them have this feature where, it slides in place. And then if you don't tighten it down, it'll slide back and forth, but it won't slide off. It'll slide and then catch.
Yeah,
I've never had one that would allow it to slide off, if it wasn't tightened down.
Depends on the tripod plate. So that universal tripod plate, it works in that same space, but it's actually about what's underneath it that's got a little stopper on it. And so you go past the stopper and then it locks in.
Yeah.
But some tripod plates, if you have a cheap one or whatever, might not have that stopper. And that's why the directionality of the plate that you put on, always look on the bottom. They always have an arrow that says lens, and just have that arrow go along with the lens and you'll be good to go. So the next thing we're talking about is twin versus single leg. And this is, with your tripod. So is it just like a telescoping pole, or do you have multiple legs that have different sections on it? Is really what you get. And we actually have both going on right now with our 2 cameras. Now these are both are Manfrottos, and they're fast versions of them, but they have all sorts of different ones that latch in every single different way you could think of, from screwing to locking to, I really like ones that give a positive locking feeling. That it's the same thing. It's just I've thought I locked a tripod before and then had it start sagging, and I'm like, oh crap, what the heck? Or just ones that I know are going to lock every time. I don't have to really wrench them down, because the worst thing is now you got to move. Now you got to unlock that super tight leg that you set up. And really the way the legs connect, I've had quite a few different tripods just from using them in the professional world, that eventually that's where they disconnect. That's the failure point, is the places that lock up is the glue that holds them will loosen, or you'll lose a keeper in them or something, and it'll spring out, and then all of a sudden the legs just yard sale everywhere.
Yeah. So Chris, I don't know if there's any big advantage to the twin style versus the single, I don't know what single style, the single leg, the telescoping style, other than the lock type compatibility. So the twin type, by the way, just to describe this with words, the twin type is, imagine, a series of stages of the leg. And when it's collapsed, there's shafts next to each other rather than nested within one another. Yeah.
And this, it's 2 sides that go down versus just one pole.
Yeah.
And the benefit happens, and I've seen a lot more of the single leg out in the field with news gatherers or journalists, because they're lighter. They sometimes can telescope really small, and it's just a little bit easier to carry around. But you do have a little more. I actually tend to like twin leg better, even though they're a little heavier, because I feel more solid on them. And I think that's just more of having the camera having it all set up the way you want it. And one, I've had a lot of time with twin legs, but the big thing that gets me, which is the next thing, but I don't know if we're ready to move on to it
just
yet.
One last note. Actually, it's kind of goes to the next thing. Spreaders.
That's what
I don't think you can get spreaders on the single leg.
They do have them, but they end up being ones that connect to the hoop and then rest between on top of locks, or it just really depends on how the leg telescopes on how that sits in. But the spreaders, well, here's my first thing. I don't know who wants a floor level spreader, but whoever they are, they need to stop, because I wish they just didn't ever make them. I know that they're probably for putting on like little dolly track things, or they're good for like studio floor or whatever. But I can't say I've ever used a high end one, a cheap one. They're all really frustrating to deal with, just because all the legs have to go down at the same time. You can't have one leg go down because they're connected, and then you fight and wrestle with the tripod. That's just the worst game to play. I want to get the tripod right where I want to get it. I want to shoot it. I want to move on.
Yeah. So the purpose of the spreaders is to make sure that the legs are spread proper distance from one another every time you open it.
Yeah, and on some tripods, it means that the legs are all going to be extended the same amount, which will help you with getting it level if you're on a level surface. If you're not on a level surface, you're gonna fight it a little bit. Usually they have little locks on them, so that if you need to get real low and you need to extend the legs out really wide, you can do that, but it shortens the height of the tripod to do that. So going back to earlier, we actually talked about, a tripod that's too short. Sometimes you want a short tripod, and a high tripod is not going to be helpful. So, knowing what one you want to use. Now, going as far as having a thing that they call a hi-hat, which is like a small little tripod, I don't know if that's necessary unless you do a lot of low shooting to consider. I mean, it's a great angle. Don't get me wrong. If you have one, awesome. But it's not going to be as useful as just your given full size. But, tabletop, other things, there could be ways to use it if you had it.
Yeah. So, I'm not a big fan of spreaders because, let me take this back. Pragmatically, I know that spreaders are good.
Yeah.
I find them somewhat annoying, even though I've been burned by the fact that when I use them, or when I use a tripod that doesn't have them. So the reason that they annoy me is that it's just another thing you have to like monkey with as you're trying to open it up.
They totally bind. They bind your movement of trying to extend the tripod. Cool thing is both of these tripods, and I think a lot of them come from them, they don't need them. They actually have a little thing at the top of where the head connects, and it locks the legs at a certain degree, so they can't go out further, and then you let it go out, and then they can go out even further, so you can get them really close to the ground, so you don't really need a spreader. So this tripod, I put a spreader on it, even though it doesn't need one, because I like them.
Now, I have been burned a little bit by not using it, because what ends up happening occasionally is you set up your tripod and you level it and you get it all good, and then you realize after the fact that one of the legs was not fully extended, and you bump the tripod or something, and that leg skips out. I don't know if that's the best way to put that, but it skips out, and then everything's off level, right? If you use the spreaders, it would have put them in place as soon as you opened it up.
Yeah. Although there's a little bit, it depends on how the spreaders work, but they definitely, that happens a lot, very often. And the thing I don't really love is about having the legs go independently is you'll do that, and then you'll end up leveling your tripod, and you'll realize when it's all the way to the edge, you're like, oh, one of these legs must be longer than the other because I can't level it. So you got to work through that. And this is definitely not stuff that you want to be fidgeting with, if you're shooting for clients or if you're on set. Like, these are things you want to know already. And if you're on set, likely you're going to have a grip or somebody helping you with that. But on the affordable side of tripods, you're talking about, and I think this is interesting. We say affordable. $1,500 or less is an affordable tripod, because they go all the way up to, you can get a tripod for $20,000, but you're going to be able to put a car on top of it too, because it's going to be able to be level and easy to move with a huge payload.
Yeah, and it's going to be good for decades.
Yeah, exactly. I remember, I think it was Miller went to their booth at NAB, and they had a cutaway of their the insides of their heads, and like most cheaper, like these or affordable, I guess I wouldn't say they're cheap, Manfrotto heads, there's not like a lot there. They're not like this crazy. It's not like looking at a Swiss watch, whereas like this, literally, like the amount of precision in the mechanism was very, very high. It was very, very robust. And, it's a tripod. You might spend $20,000, but you never buy a tripod again. It'll, you could use it to beat off the zombies when they come. Yeah,
actually, you're reminding me of another facet I forgot to write out on our outline here for the pro level, but we'll save that for a few minutes from now.
Right.
So the next thing, which actually has to do with the legs, is the lock type. We kind of talked about this a little bit.
Yeah.
And now, so the lock types, the common ones are the twist lock, the clamp lock, and I've seen one. Well, there's one that I've seen that's like button lock.
Yeah.
Am I missing any, Chris? Those.
That's about it. And then it's also about how many. So like on these tripods, they only have per leg one place to loosen to get them to extend. Whereas if you have a 3-level, some other tripods, there might be 3 or 2 places to loosen and make them taller. So you have 2 more adjustments to do that.
Yeah.
And if they're really tall, 3 or whatever. It is nice having one arm, though these end up looking really cattywampus. In fact, I'm watching that one there, and it's like one leg, the spreader is a good foot away from the other ones. No, it's working fine, and it's actually as it's supposed to, but it just looks funny.
Yeah. So I've only had one tripod failure in my career, and it was a bad one. And it was a button lock. And the thing with the button lock is while you're holding the button, it's unlocked. And when you let go, it's locked. That's the idea. But like you were saying before, there's no feedback mechanism that says it's locked now. You know, it's the reverse. The feedback mechanism is when it's unlocked. And theoretically, you're supposed to trust when, as long as you're not pressing that button, it's locked. And it failed. Camera went down and lens broke.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
But other than that, I like the twist lock personally. But the clamp lock's nice too, because it is one of those ones where clamp locks down. That's how you know it's locked, as opposed to just twisting it as hard as you can.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because I'm thinking about, what it used to be, because we have these tripods that only have one connection. And really, it wasn't that long ago that this was a new technology in tripods, that you had one place to tighten or there was all sorts of other weird ones. I've seen ones that had like discs on the top that locked you in, and it locked all the legs together. And it was like a real complicated mechanism and all that kind of stuff. And now I think even at the affordable range, you don't have that as much. And it really depends. You got to know what you're going to do with it. If you're going to be, my first job was I was get coverage of things. So it was like, if we're somewhere, we're going to make commercials for the next year, I need to shoot, the whole entire building. I need to move these tripod, 50 times today. It's going to be about setting up, breaking down, setting up, breaking down. If I can do that faster, I'm going to get more work in. So, if you don't need that, then is it worth putting that extra money into those things?
Yeah. Yeah. So do you have a personal preference on the lock type?
These are latch type.
Yeah.
And they don't, when they're down, they're locked. And I like that the best. Though, I would prefer a like click, like the twist to click and they're locked. Like that's nice. But I think that's just a security blanket. I don't think it's really, because it could mean nothing. And I'd still like that, that click or whatever. It's just, it's the reassuring part of it. It kind of reminds me of like, having to put a cotter pin in or something so it doesn't fall down or whatever. But
I wonder if it's like a torque wrench thing where it's like you've put enough torque on this to.
Well, that's the other thing is all this stuff wears down because you crank it because you're trying to make sure you're secure. And likely what happened is you didn't tighten it very much and it slipped a little bit. And you're like, oh man, I really got to crank this. No, you just didn't tighten it enough. And now you just wrecked your thing by over cranking it. But that's definitely the thing. I've had some really heavy tripods, and at the time the camera was heavier. So it was like, I don't care what I'm carrying. I'm not carrying them both, but then, so the bigger the tripod, the less its mobility really is going to make a difference. But, for everything you're shooting a DSLR or a mirrorless camera or a camcorder of, I think most camcorders these days are going to be well under 10 pounds. Yeah. Or at least under 12 with, everything on them and stuff. And that's, there was not a lot of tripods just a few years ago for payloads between like 7 and 14 pounds. And now there's a bunch. It was like you had to find a really expensive one. In fact, we have one over here that was $8,000. We use it for a prompter because we don't have any other cameras that are heavy enough to need it. But it was for the full-size Ursa, Blackmagic Ursa, which was 16 pounds or something like that.
16 pounds with no lens.
Yeah, with no lens. So and we were like, we were really excited to get it. And now
didn't have a tripod.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe last thing before we move on to the professional, and actually this is a feature that maybe kind of crosses the enthusiast to professional category, which is like the build material.
Yeah.
So there's mainly aluminum and carbon fiber. And boy, Chris, have you ever used a stainless steel?
Yeah, older ones. I think, stainless steel used to be cheaper than aluminum or something, but aluminum seems to be the go-to, although aluminum is one of those things that's strong until it's not strong anymore.
Yeah.
And that's where carbon fiber is really great, is it's light and strong.
Yeah.
And that's, really great. But,
if you're really lucky, you might find a wooden tripod.
Yeah, I've used a wooden tripod, not like on purpose, not like I wanted to, but I've had to use them before, and it's totally the same thing. And that's where Mike asked me before we started rolling if I'd used any tripods that had like cranks on them to pan or tilt. And I'd used one that was, wooden, that, same thing. It was like wooden, and you like used bands to lock it off and stuff. It was weird.
Cool.
And then, but then pedestals for broadcast television, because the cameras on them used to be humongous. I mean, ginormous, very, very heavy. And so they had to be like hydraulically, you had to, you're turning gears to turn other gears because you wouldn't have enough strength to actually pan the camera. But there's a lot of kind of, I guess with the weight, a lot of those types of mechanisms are like, well, why would you ever go that complicated? And it's like, well, because it used to be 100 pounds.
Yeah. Pretty much.
But yeah, I think the big thing about weight is really what you're doing with it. If you are a traveling videographer, you're doing weddings or somewhere where you're going to have to, move around your gear from location to location or often or whatever, that's where that kind of weight benefits. But you usually, when you're looking at like an aluminum versus a carbon fiber, you're talking about a 35% premium to do that. But like I said, it's definitely going to last longer because than the aluminum. Aluminum's like, as soon as you hit a little bend in it or whatever, they're just on their way, to wanting to collapse. Probably not like a tent pole or something. It's not that cheap, but I'm saying it's just, I think it's a lot easier to get it out of that carbon fiber. I'm trying to think. I think I might have had steel. The first tripod we had at the station was a steel tripod. It was
really,
it was heavy. I bet you it was probably 30 pounds.
Yeah. We had an aluminum one, but even it was the heaviest piece of equipment we had. Well, no, I take that back. The camera was pretty heavy.
I just remember the like actual head of it was this big. It was well over 100 millimeter bull.
Oh, wow.
But the camera was a full sized, well, it was only an SD camera. I really think it looked like it was really amazing, and I'm sure it cost a lot of money, but it didn't do much.
So here's my advice. If you're the one who's going to carry it, get a carbon fiber.
Yeah. If you can pay for it and you're the one that has to carry for it.
Yeah. If someone else is carrying it around, save the money.
pay them instead, I guess.
Okay. So we can transition over to the professional level stuff. So the one thing I was going to mention before we get into these two things, which you mentioned, the Swiss watch mechanisms inside those Miller tripods. It's the fluidity adjustments, right? Like in an intermediate tripod, you might have fluid or non-fluid, but eventually you get into this level of like, okay, well, how much fluidity is on the pan versus
you might have a couple stages. You might have a 1, 2, and a 3 or something like that. Going up to 5, it's probably definitely pro level. Versus like today, most are a gradual. It's from 0 to 100%.
Yeah.
Or not 100. Yeah, 100% would be locked down. But that you'd have a lot of resistance to be able to do. And sometimes that's helpful, like because you can't get your camera to be weighted really well. So to do a pan, you really need to have that mount. But you really want to have a balance on your tripod.
Yeah.
You want to be able to do those moves no matter how big your camera is with ease.
Yeah, and the other aspect of this is a counterbalance system. So if you have a big camera with a great tripod, you can dial in the counterbalance so that you can basically tilt the camera and let go of it, and it will stay where it is, like without locking it. Right.
Yeah.
And they add like some springiness to it. So if you set it up, for example, a counterbalance on a big heavy camera, you take that camera off, you put a small camera on, and you do the same thing. It's going to like kind of want to go back where it came from. It's springy almost.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of stuff you do find in the professional level tripods.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Whenever you get into any professional filmmaking videography or whatever you're doing, precision and ability to repeat yourself is where you had to be at, right? So if you think about, if you're on set and you're doing a scene with a really expensive actor, you don't have a lot of time to dink around and try to get it right. You need to get it right the first time you do it. So everything is to be exactly precise. So not only do you know where you got to pull your focus from point to point, but you also have maybe even your pan locked off. So you hit a stop.
Yeah.
You might have it so that it's so that you only move a certain amount of space, and you know this will travel X amount with this, this lens on or what have you. You're trying to get down to being able to measure what you're doing so that you can be precise every time. And these are things you think about before you start. It's not like on-site problem solving. This is pre-production or experience that pays into it.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, we're going out of order from our list here, Chris, so I apologize for that. But we have on here just like these cranking or wheeled pans and tilts. And kind of along with that is the measurement of the angles.
Yes.
So for a motion picture camera, when they do a tilt, they spin a wheel or they turn a crank so that it tilts at the right level. And then they have a thing on there that indicates what is the angle that it's tilted at.
Yeah.
For those precision reasons.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, I'm going to go from X to Y, and I need to get there,
Right.
and you need to be able to get there, repeat,
Right.
and do it the same way, because it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to cut it if you have really talented people acting and you have to redo it, not because the actors screwed up their line or whatever, but because the cameraman couldn't operate the camera the way it needed to be. That's why everybody's got a specialty too on site, is so you can depend everybody to do the thing. If they capture it, it's the moment.
Right. Those are really rare. I've never actually used one of those. I've only seen them.
Yeah, I've not needed that kind of precision on any work I've done. Although, I take that back. I mean, not personally, but I like, seeing a full rig at shows and stuff like that and messing around with them. Usually it's like the super rigged out camera.
Yeah.
And so it's like, not only is it a heavy camera, but it's got like, previews and follow focuses and a matte box and like just a huge amount of stuff on it. So you have not only a really oddly weighted thing, it's also heavy. So it's like you really need all that precision just to get it balanced right, and then to be able to rinse and repeat.
Yeah. So that maybe just goes along with the next thing, which is just the payload. Like we have a very nice high-end professional tripod here because we needed something that could hold a 16+ pound camera.
Yep. And at the time, it was just a category. It was like from 15 to 27 pounds. Like, I don't need anything above the 17, but okay. And, at least we can, do something crazy. And then they released the mini, and now we have the mini, and it is just sitting on a shelf too.
I remember, Chris, at the time, this was many years ago, when we needed this tripod, I was looking to buy one before we ended up trading one for one. But it was like, what is the cheapest tripod we can find that will hold 16 pounds? And I think this was it.
Oh yeah, totally. At $8,000, it was the like, yep, that's what you got. I remember being kind of like defeated a little bit by that too. Like okay. So I guess we at NAB will go and talk to people. You talk to them about the thing, like, we'd like to take this. Well, it's probably not something we'd want to, the Videomaker audience. Let's talk about this one over here. That'll be for your, camcorder or whatever. And it's like, oh, well, why not? It's $10,000, and it's like, oh, yeah, that's our top for talking about cameras.
Yeah,
we don't talk about $10,000 tripods very often.
Yeah, but apart from those factors, the precision of the controls, the payload, and maybe to a lesser degree that sort of crank system.
Yeah, but I think that's very specific too.
It is. We're really talking about a degree of quality between the enthusiast level and the pro level. Yeah. It's just like what has a nicer build quality, that is going to last 10 years rather than 3 years.
And know that it's not going to live an easy life too. A lot of these things they're pretty bulletproof. This is about as close to military grade as we make in the world is that high end cinematography tools. I mean, these are things that very much could sit right next to, the tripod you're using for a gun. They're very, very high end and expensive. So it makes sense that they are as nice as they are because of the amount of money that you can make with them.
The great thing about tripods is while there is some innovation here, there's not a ton.
Yeah.
And so you can spend a bunch of time researching the tripod that's going to be perfect for you and buy it and then never have to think about this stuff again.
Yeah.
They last a long time. And if you do have to get a new tripod in the future, you might be able to find like the same one, many years later.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Or like just the next model up, like there'll be one number bigger on the end of it. One side note for everybody, when you're going and buying a tripod, you can get, we talk about the tripod legs. We talked about the tripod head. Them together is a kit or a system, and not every tripod leg is sold with every head. So if you say have a head you want to get, just know how compatible, like the size of the bowl on the bottom and like 50, 75, 100 millimeter. Typically those will probably be the ones that anybody that's listening to this is dealing with, probably more like 75 and 100. And that is, somewhat universal. So, finding, especially if you're buying a head and legs from the same manufacturer, likely you're going to be able to, if they aren't supposed to go together, there's things you can buy to make them compatible with each other. But the kits are really just, the most popular things they put together. And it's, interesting, all the tripod manufacturers, they have a SKU for the legs, they have a SKU for the head, and then the two together is actually a third product.
Yeah.
So, just beware of that. It's not like going to McDonald's and buying the meal deal that, now you get the fries for 50 cents off or whatever. It's usually the same price if you buy them all together or if not. So make sure to put together the ones you want. But if you go to B&H, you'll be like, there's 400 Manfrotto tripods. And it's like, no, it's like every variation along with like, the number they have for the special screw that they use or whatnot. So there's a lot of little pieces that can go to a tripod that you can buy and replace as well. So, make sure to pay attention to legs, head, or kit or system. Tripod system is the term when they release them together. And it's usually like, a new technology on either one or a new paint job.
Yeah. The first time I ever had to shop for a tripod, I found it kind of intimidating because of the thing you just said, right?
Yeah.
The fact that there's so much there. And sometimes, at least when I was shopping, and it's been several years, it was actually kind of difficult to make a decision about like what works with what. And you said it, right? Like just match the bowl. So if you get a 75 millimeter head, get the 75 millimeter bowl sticks, all good.
Yeah. And of course, payload, make sure that they match each other. Usually your legs are going to hold more weight than your head. So your legs might be rated for 20 pounds, but your head's only for 12. Yeah. That's typical. They're not going to match up. It's not going to be just magic. I actually remember the first time I was like, oh, tripods are different from one to the next. This was the first time I went to B&H and I was like, holy crap, look at all of those tripods. And it just like, oh my, just head spinning that I could have a selection of tripods. It's like you go in the store for ketchup and there's 50 of them.
Yeah.
Like, oh, which ketchup should I buy?
Regular. I want the regular tripod.
The regular. Give me the no special sauce tripod, please.
And also, if you need any more help, I encourage you to check out the buyer's guide we have on this. We'll put a link in the description of this episode, but you can also just go to videomaker.com. We've got buyer's guides in the main navigation. It's under production gear.
Yeah, I spend the time to go to B&H and really understand what everybody's doing, and then they send it to us, and we get to play with it, and then we go, yeah, that's good. And then you guys get to just read the article and get the benefit from it, which is great.
And the great thing about the buyer's guide is it does a price comparisons between Amazon and B&H, so you could just go with whoever's cheaper.
Yeah, totally. And they're living. So you check back, maybe a month from now. Actually, being that NAB is no longer, we're probably going to hear of some tripod announcements sometime over the next month, maybe.
Yep. I think that's the end, Chris. Anything else related to tripods?
Only 52 minutes of tripod talk.
Of course, at the beginning of this.
I was like, we'll talk about 20 minutes. And then we get
every
on the
time,
roll.
Every time.
That's how it goes.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
See ya.
Big thanks to everyone for listening. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, we would love it if you went to iTunes, actually. Even if you're not an iTunes user, go to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review, and write up a written review. We love reading those things, and it's actually a big help for the podcast. It helps Apple to tell more people about it, which is obviously good for us. So please go and do that if you enjoy the show. So for Chris Monlux and everyone here at Videomaker, I'm Mike Wilhelm, and you've been listening to the Videomaker podcast. We'll catch you next time.